is Evangelism 101, and in October we'll do Evangelism 201. So stay tuned and get that into your calendars. Any other announcements that I've missed? Oh, diocesan staff. Registration for the college is open. Camp registration is open. I'd like to introduce Alex Flanagan, who has joined us this evening for the first time. He is the brand new canon for camp and youth and family ministries on the bishop's staff. So he's going to be helping us with the tech in the background. But if you need to send him a private DM because you have camp questions, go ahead and do that, and he'll get back to you with information. All right.
Can I make an announcement?
Yes.
There's a book study that the Beloved Community is offering in April, May, and it's on circle practices, which goes back to indigenous wisdom. Sign up is available through the diocesan webpage.
Great. I will look for that link to pop in as well for you all. And then anybody who has joined the call a little late, we are inviting you to change your name so that it also reflects where your congregation, the congregation that you're worshiping in. So if you need help with that, let me know. All right.
And with that, let's begin our time in prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
God, who loves us, who has loved us since before day one, and God who loves everyone and everything. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you for your presence and for the opportunity to be present with one another. We ask that we would recognize your presence more acutely as we discuss evangelism tonight. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Alrighty, let me get set up with my sharing here. Can you all see that okay? Excellent. I'm going to, there we go. So welcome to the first of two sessions about evangelism. I absolutely love evangelism and talking about it. So I am always available for questions, and I'm just super excited to engage this topic together tonight. As Susan shared, this will be the first of two gatherings about evangelism. We will have our second one in October, on October 3rd. So in thinking about how to kind of delineate the two different sessions on evangelism, I decided to go with this. We'll focus a little bit more on personal evangelism tonight, and then kind of focus a little bit more on corporate evangelism, or like evangelism in our churches, in the context of our churches, for our October session. So I read a lot about evangelism, and sometimes it gets really confusing, like the confluence of personal evangelism and church-wide evangelism. And obviously these two are not completely distinct from one another, but I think it's helpful to talk about how each of us follows Jesus and are called into evangelism in our daily lives, as distinct from how our churches are thinking about and stepping towards evangelism. So hopefully that's kind of a distinction that works for you all. Honestly, I'd love to hear feedback probably after the second one about how that delineation worked out, and if that was clarifying or more muddling, but we'll save that for another day. So with that framing, let's dive into our time together. If I can figure out, there we go. So my parents happened to be in Rome with a tour group a couple weeks ago. And while they were there, I encouraged them to go and see my personal favorite depiction of evangelism. This is a work by Caravaggio, and it is called The Calling of Saint Matthew. And earlier this week, a package arrived on my doorstep with this lovely print of the calling of St. Matthew. It's actually hanging on my wall here just to my left. I'm touching it right now. But I decided to take pictures for you all tonight so you could see it a little bit clearer. So here we can see a depiction of Jesus calling the tax collector Matthew to follow him. Notice the difference between the clothing of the men seated around the table compared to Jesus and Peter on the right side. I needed to crop this image a bit, but the seated men are also wearing elaborate footwear, while Jesus and Peter stand with bare feet. Of the seated men, 2 of them are not even looking up, so intent on counting their coins. You might also notice the barrier of darkness between Jesus and the seated men. And yet, while there is this barrier of darkness, all of the light in the picture, or all of the light that is shining on the men's faces, is actually coming from Jesus and not from the window above. You can see the slanting light from the window, but the light that is shining on the seated men is coming directly from Jesus. Evangelism is the good news of the coming of Jesus Christ into our dark world. Jesus comes to us unwarranted, unsought, and without our initiation. This is the free work of God. This is not technique. It's not organization. It's not systems. It's God, raw God. These men are not looking for Jesus. He found them and completely disrupted their lives. Jesus comes to all and for all, not just to those who seek him or have an interest in religion. Notice the hand of Jesus as well. This hand is pointing at, choosing, inviting Matthew. Jesus comes and chooses each of us. There's no mistaking what Caravaggio is implying by Jesus's hand. You may recognize the similarity to the creation of Adam by Michelangelo that resides on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The hand of Jesus in Caravaggio's painting is both the hand of the second Adam and the hand of God. We see God in action here, reenacting creation in and through the divine work of recreation in the person of Matthew and in all seated here in this painting. We see a life-changing calling initiated by God. So to start here tonight, evangelism is not a program. It's not a memorized script. Evangelism is never manipulative or disrespectful or coercive. Evangelism is not concerned with the survival of the church or of membership or legacy. Evangelism is an experience of God, raw God, the love of God. The love of God who comes to us, calls us, and transforms absolutely everything. And Matthew responds with astonishment and surprise, almost not believing that Jesus was calling him. Now, there's an interesting debate in the art world about which character is Matthew here. Is it the man with the rich beard pointing at himself with one hand while holding on to his money with the other hand? Or is it the young man at the table's end who is being pointed at, who is so engaged with his money he is not even looking up? Pope Francis said this about this section of the painting. He said, that finger of Jesus pointing at Matthew That's me. I feel like him, like Matthew. It's the gesture of Matthew that strikes me. He holds onto his money as if to say, no, not me. No, this money is mine. Here, this is me, a sinner on whom the Lord has turned his gaze. I wonder if this connects with any of you. That moment when Jesus looks at you, that experience of being compelled by the love of God and experiencing the call of God in that love, saying, follow me. Patricia Lyons has a wonderful little book called What is Evangelism? And I'm going to reference this a number of times tonight, and also would love to offer this as a resource for you all. It's a really short book. It is only 82 pages long, and it is a wonderful kind of first step into evangelism and understanding it. Patricia Lyons says, evangelism is what the Holy Spirit is doing, ever arriving as the catalytic and contagious good news of God's love. At its core, evangelism is God's work. It's not our work, it's God's work. Evangelism is first and foremost the ministry of the Holy Spirit in the world. That raw God stepping towards us and offering love. God calling each of us, every human being, to him. Evangelism is a joyful proclamation of what is already happening. Well, all of creation is invited into this work of evangelism, of offering this good news of God's love to ourselves and to others. Evangelism is chiefly the holy work of God to make God known throughout creation. Evangelism is what God does and what God is doing at every moment, in every place, and in every heart. So if that's the case, then, if evangelism is chiefly God's work, what then is our role in that? First of all, we listen. We listen for the Spirit's invitation to join in God's work of loving the world. We listen for how God's love is active and alive in our own stories and experiences. We listen for the ways God's love is active and alive in other people's stories and lives, whether they use the language of God or not. When we begin to listen for God, we experience God's constant evangelism of everything. The good news of God that is drawing all that is towards the new heaven and new earth. Before we can share this good news, however, we must have experienced it, and this requires daily conversion. Ignatian prayer offers this message to us, that the experience of God's love and grace every day is so important for discipleship. It is astounding news that we are loved, accepted, forgiven, redeemed, and chosen in Jesus Christ. And we must be daily converted by the love of Jesus. If we each received and named the love of God in our lives anew every day, how much would that change everything? This is God's work done by God's Spirit, and God initiates this work in every place. We cannot share the good news out of our own energy or inspiration. It is the Spirit that always goes before us. So this is a little bit of a rough analogy, but I remember reading in the newspaper long ago, I think I was in high school, about grocery stores actually putting the smell of baking bread into their air systems so that you would walk into a grocery store and you would smell freshly baked bread and suddenly you would want to eat bread. So it's a bit of a crude analogy to the Spirit, but it's similar. The Spirit goes before us to prepare the hearts and desires and minds and senses of people so they are prepared to receive the message of God's love. And in light of that listening, in light of our experience of the daily experience of God's love, we are compelled by the love of God to be evangelists. So the word evangelism comes from a word evangelium. It has both Greek and Latin origins. And the word evangelium is really fascinating because it means both good news and it also refers to the person who brings good news, the messenger, if you will. So over time, we Christians have kind of adopted the use of the word gospel to refer to evangelium or the good news. But with that linguistic ambiguity that's offered to us in evangelium, I think it reveals a sacred truth about evangelism. What we say is only good news because of the way that good news is actually actively transforming our lives. Patricia Lyons says, the evangelist that is being transformed by the love of God in Christ is the good news in the flesh. The evangelist that is being transformed by the love of God in Christ is the good news in the flesh. You hear that mixture, the good news and the messenger. If you are following Jesus, your life is already an evangelist sharing of the good news of God's love. Because, of course, following Jesus is never just an idea. Following Jesus is an experience that is happening to every portion of our bodies and our spirits. Tricia Lyons goes on to say, a life being transformed by Christ is sharing the gospel with every breath. Your life has been part of God's evangelism of all creation since your baptism. And this sharing of the good news of God involves both our words and our actions. Indeed, it includes our entire lives. Here's the thing that's unique about being an Episcopal evangelist. We believe that God is already present in every person's life. So we, as evangelists then, are not salespeople or marketing experts. We are not sharing a new product, right? We believe that God knows and loves every single human being. And we believe that God is calling all people into deeper relationship and love each day, each minute, whether a person believes in God or not. We also believe, of course, that one of the gifts that God gives us is choice. All people are free to accept or ignore the call of God. And we also believe that God has freedom and that God uses God's freedom to continually call all people to him. Therefore, our role is not to bring new news to people as though any person has not been bathed in the love of God since day one, but to bring good news, to notice and name the action of God's love in our lives and in their lives. The evangelist uses their entire life to show what listening to God looks like. We do this by listening to the lives of others so closely so compassionately, so curiously, that we can find the voice of God calling in the lives of others. So evangelists are really more like seekers, not salespeople. We do not bring God into somebody's life. Rather, we listen and study the joys and the pains of others, even in a first or a brief encounter, to discern where God is already calling them and already converting darkness into light. Is it possible to be a bad evangelist? Yes, very much so. First of all, we all know how important motives are. Gandhi has this fabulous quote. He says, "The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything he does becomes tainted." I'm sure you all have had experiences with people that you know from the get-go that they are wanting to sell you something or wanting to get to a certain point in the conversation or wanting it to turn it a certain way. Our motivations matter. And when we come to people with anything other than a deep desire to listen, that motive will always show its head. Another quote that I love by Becky Pippert is, "Evangelism is not memorizing techniques to use on unsuspecting victims." I love that one. Evangelism is never, 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 not ever about numbers at our churches that are looking low or the future looking bleak. Never. Evangelism is not a survival strategy. It is not a growth strategy. These are motivated by anxiety and not by the overwhelming, compelling love of God. And evangelism is only and always fueled by the compelling love of God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, Paul says, "For the love of Christ compels us or urges us on, because we are convinced that one has died for all, and therefore all have died. And he died for all, so that those who live might live no longer for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them." For the love of Christ urges us on, for the love of Christ compels us. The good news of God is always fresh and distinct. You know, in the story of Pentecost in the book of Acts, we see the good news proclaimed in all languages, making it tangible and comprehensible to the entire world. And this is key in evangelism. The message is most effectively passed person to person in the context of who the people in the conversation are, where they are, and what their experiences are. The work of making the gospel message contextual and understandable is essential. The gospel is interactive. The good news of God's love is interactive. We don't bring words and techniques. We must pay attention to what God is already doing and stirring, because God's work does not begin with us. It begins with God. So the question comes, how do we evangelize? How do we evangelize? And I meant for these 5 to show up on a different screen, and they did not. They showed up right now. Can you all see the 1 through 5? Yeah, okay. So let me just run through these 5 since they're here, and then I'll loop back to what I was going to start by saying here. So this is a list that's offered by Patricia Lyons here in this book, What is Evangelism? And she talks about these 5 different things of how do we evangelize? How are we evangelists? She says, first of all, be a disciple. We follow Jesus. We experience the love of Jesus. And if we are not experiencing the love of God, there's no way to talk about it or share it. Second, learn to recognize and follow the voice of God in your life through scripture, prayer, sacrament, and community. Learn to recognize the voice of God. Third, listen to other people share their lives with you and listen for God's presence and voice in their stories. This is a really fun thing to practice, and we can practice it with anybody, like listening for where God is active, where God might be stirring them, where their longings are coming up, or their joys or their pain, and how is God being with them and active in their lives, whether they use that language or not. Fourth, name where you see God in their life story, using their words and experiences. And again, this is really important, using their words and experiences. It leans back into that contextual piece. People use all kinds of words to explain their life happenings. And sometimes the words of God can be triggering to them. Listen to the words that they use and meet them in that place. And then 5, be ready to explain what you mean by God's voice and how you have learned to hear it. If you're talking about your own story and the things that you feel you are being called by God, people will ask, how do you recognize God's voice? There's some great tools to further parse that out in this book, of kind of helping you to think through these things in your own life and put some language around it so that you are ready. So you don't just have this, dictum kind of hanging over your head, but you actually have the tools to develop language around that for yourself. So how do we evangelize? Well, when we are compelled by the love of Christ, we actually must share it. It's kind of like that image of a cup that's so full that everything is just coming out the top. And when you have experienced the love of God, it's like that. You just have to share. Both extroverts and introverts can be listeners on behalf of God, and both are needed. Sometimes we like to equate evangelism with extroverts, and that is not accurate. Sometimes there are certain giftings to make certain people especially adept at listening deeply and naming God's presence and being in that space, and we call those evangelists. But really, all of us, by nature of our discipleship, by nature of our experience of the love of God, are called to be evangelists and to bring our particular gifts to people. You may have heard the phrase, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. It is attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. However, he almost certainly did not actually say this, and so I'm not sure where it actually comes from. And even if he did say it, he was wrong. Our actions, our lives, as well as our words, are all a part of evangelism. In Luke, Jesus' final words to us come in the Great Commission. You will receive power and be my witnesses. And then he creates these circles, these expanding circles in Judea, in Samaria, to the ends of the earth. This broader and broader space in which we are called to do this. Now, in the Great Commission, you may notice you will receive power and be my witnesses. That Jesus is describing what they'll do. Witnesses is not a verb, it is a noun. It is what we are. The question isn't whether or not we want to be witnesses. It is whether we are faithful witnesses. We are all witnesses. Witnesses, of course, are simply people who see things and experience them and then share what they've seen and experienced. And no two witnesses can witness in exactly the same way. By baptism, each of us is called to witness, to be a witness, for our lives to reflect that call as well as our words. We are each called to this, and we are compelled to do so as the result of experiencing the transformative love of God. Just brings us back to Caravaggio's painting. You might notice that beneath the hand of Jesus, there is another hand, the hand of Peter. The hand seems to be attempting to mirror the hand of Jesus. And yet there's a hesitancy there. There's maybe some unsureness. Jesus involves us in calling others to experience the compelling love of God. It is a gift to be participants in this divine work. However weakly, however hesitantly, we are called to use our words and our lives to call others into the experience of God's love. With that, I'm going to stop the share. And I would love to have a conversation. Like, what questions spring to mind? What surprised you about this? I wonder if it shook up any conceptions of evangelism that you might have come here with tonight.
Yeah, I was really surprised to hear Episcopalians even say evangelism, because I equated it with the, like, street corner preacher trying to convert you and everything. So it's let's see, it is comforting to know that that's not what we're going to do. It's also seems more natural. It's a natural way of becoming part of this community rather than being forced into it, or like, you're damned if you don't join, so yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that onus of the work being ours, of like whether people will be saved or damned depending on, the words and the message that we bring them. Like, it is such a great relief to recognize, like, no, this is God's work, and God is calling all people and loves all people, and we get to join in that. It really takes that onus and pressure off, that I think, creates that anxiety fueled evangelism.
Andrea, I deeply appreciate that you said and emphasized that evangelism is not about the numbers of people who you bring in to a congregation, because that is about anxiety. And that instead, you didn't actually use this phrase, at least I don't remember you using the phrase, but that evangelism is about helping or noticing people in relationship with God. And that is what we're actually helping to bring to bear, not that they're sitting in the pew, but that they have a relationship with God.
Very much so. And I think, people matter to God, and so I don't want to say that numbers, numbers of people don't count, but anytime our motivation with evangelism is to get more people into our church buildings, that is a motivation that will absolutely be apparent. And it's a huge turnoff because people don't want to be counted as a number, and that's not actually what we're about. And so I think again, is what we're doing fueled by anxiety, or is it being fueled by the love of God? And that can be a hard thing to discern, but definitely work that we are called to do anytime we're thinking about evangelism, to step back and say, where is this coming from?
Well, I was raised Jehovah's Witness, so I had a whole different picture of evangelism. I really like what you're saying. It it really warms my heart, because it's really all about relationships, and so um, yeah, I just feel so much more at peace even thinking about evangelism, because it's getting to know people and listening to who they are and where God is active in their life. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you, Stephen. And I am also with you in being raised in a different denomination, where evangelism was, decoding the Bible for people so that they would have all the right answers and they would, be able to be saved by knowing the right answers. And I think there are a lot of really damaging experiences and pictures of evangelism out there that we have either encountered or experienced personally or been raised with. And so I'm glad that this message, this like perspective on it is life-giving to you. It certainly is to me. Like it really made me come alive and be like, oh my gosh, I love evangelism. I'm passionate about this.
This
We're
is
working on
great.
an advertisement to go into the Chamber of Commerce's relocation guide that will live for a year. And one of the things that we're trying to communicate is come join us in this journey to experience God's love, and to experience the affirmations of being in community with God. And so it's kind of exciting to be able to put that message here in North Idaho out there that is very different from what so many of the box churches are portraying, or the more fundamental churches are portraying here. So this is very, very useful information. Thank you.
You are welcome, Kristen. I'm glad you all are doing that. That brings up another thing, which is that, invitation is really key. Like it's one thing to be experiencing the love of God and to be saying, okay, we're welcoming and inviting, but actually we need to invite people. We need to listen to people. There's that, nothing replaces that human to human interaction. I had Fred Jessett and his wife Chris over at my home a couple weeks ago for dinner. And Fred Jessett is a priest in our diocese. He just turned 90 years old a couple weeks ago, and he has kind of late in his ministry, he started a new church in Sammamish, Washington, so just on the other side of the mountains. And he told me about his experience with church planting there, and it being a new community of burgeoning tech folks. And he went door to door and knocked on thousands of doors. Now, granted, this was, a good 25, 30 years ago, but he knocked on thousands of doors and opened himself to having a conversation about God and about faith with whoever answered the door. And he was laughing with me. He said, he would knock on doors of Mormon folks or Jehovah's Witness, and the humor of him as an Episcopal priest knocking on the doors of Mormons or Jehovah's Witness and turning that narrative, if you will. He just guffawed about it. It was lovely. But on their first day of church, they had 170 folks who came out on the initial day when they launched their church. And I was so moved by his story. And I know that it's a scary thing and people's brain, they jump to like, oh, I don't want to knock on doors. And I'm not necessarily promoting that. But what I am promoting is that invitation that Fred went out there and said, we are here. And who are you? And what are you longing for? And what is your life? And opening himself to that conversation and offering that invitation.
I know Fred and Chris, and I actually went to the church that they founded in Sammamish. It's Good Samaritan. And it was marvelous. He didn't knock on the doors that he knew that people had another church, Episcopalians. But I have neighbors that he touched, and they spoke of his gentleness and his generosity. And he was still the vicar when we joined Good Samaritan there, and to listen to the stories about, reaching out to people and sharing it to us.
Thank you, Jeannie. That's a lovely story to hear.
This is Ethan Bergman and Grace Ellensberg, and I was raised as a registered dietitian nutritionist, so this is probably not a very good comparison, but Episcopal evangelism seems to me like it's organic and whole foods versus processed foods, highly processed foods. It comes in an organic way that God puts us in certain circumstances, and there's a person there we're talking to, and that seems like the way that we as, well, I'm a Lutheran pastor, but as a Episcopal or Lutheran would evangelize because God provides that opportunity. It's organic versus highly processed and kind of reconfigured, I guess.
Thank you for that perspective, Ethan. Yes, and when I said Episcopal, I was not trying to be exclusive. I know we have a number of Lutheran clergy and folks on the call as well, and I'm really talking about more of that way of approaching evangelism that is generous and coming out of the love of God and not being an anxiety kind of taking experience.
I appreciate what you said about the need to invite, because it seems so easy for us to gear up a welcoming ministry and to stand inside the building and wait for somebody to come. And when the door opens, welcome, welcome. And the invitation, especially if it could be personal, like, would you come sit with me, for the liturgy, so that it's engaging and not just saying, come to my church, find a church where you can worship Jesus, but it's very specific, sort of invitation to friendship, or to deepen a friendship, that to have a Christian religious dimension to it if it didn't have it before.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. That reminds me too of something that Patricia Lyons has in her book, which is that she does talk about that need for that initial like hospitality and welcome. But she also points out that it's crucial to have that paired with deep formation and learning opportunities within the congregation as well, because a warm welcome is lovely, but if the congregation is not a place where the love of God is being experienced in that ever deepening way, the church will not be a solid place for people to experience that transformative love of God long term. And I will talk about that a little bit more in October with more of the church perspective around evangelism.
I hope Thomas is still online, but St. Matthew's and Holy Trinity and St. Michael's in Yakima, we are in a partnership together. We share one priest, but Holy Trinity is very unique and very, in many ways. They don't have a church building as per se. They meet in a community, a senior center, and it is very different from the traditional way that a lot of the Episcopalians or a lot of churches do their services, but yet it's very similar, and it's also very welcoming. It's just a really neat place. You can walk in and you can walk out. You can do whatever, the Spirit moves you. And like I say, I wish Thomas was still here because he's a member of that
He's here.
I'm here.
Holy Trinity. Can you speak more on it, Thomas? I touched base, but can you help me?
Well, gosh, let me think for a second. It's different. It has certain frustrations, I will admit, not having a church buildings. So we're at the mercy of the people who run the senior center. But at the same time, it's liberating in that we don't have to worry about bills like utilities, maintenance, and repair. And that in of itself allows us to think about how can we grow our community in a safe manner and one that is faithful to the teachings of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Thank you, Thomas and Jeannie. I think that you all have the gift of what many church plants experience, which is that you don't have a building, you don't have a lot of the details to think about, and so your work is to make the main thing the main thing. Like you are focused on experiencing the love of God together and sharing the love of God. And it really kind of has this natural, like simplifying, you know, action where you can kind of just consider what the main thing is and kind of understand and listen for the call of God of who you are in your particular context in this particular time. So I think that you all are I don't think that you are in a bad place for sure. You all are set up well. So let me just share here as we're ending up in these last few minutes, some next steps of how you may lean into this work of evangelism between now and October. First of all, I would encourage you all to pray. Pray for a heart of evangelism. Pray to be filled with the love of God. Listen for the ways that God is working in your life and in the lives of others, and start practicing those listening skills. And I'll just do a little, flag that at Gathering Day, the upcoming Gathering Day is going to be all about listening to one another's stories and hearing the work of God in those stories and helping to put language around that for one another. So if you're available to come to Gathering Day, that is exactly the work that we're going to be doing there. So pray, listen for the work of God in yourself and others. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, I do recommend this book by Patricia Lyons called What is Evangelism? And there are some great tools in it, some prompts of putting some language around do you know how to communicate clearly in deeds and or words that God is calling the person in front of you just as God is calling you into a personal relationship with God that will last and grow beyond death? That's one of the prompts. And it goes on further to kind of help you develop language around that. Do you know how to communicate clearly in both deeds and words that God has a mission to love all creation that includes every human life and is worthy to make choices and sacrifices to join? There are other prompts in here as well that kind of help you put language around your own story and your own experience of God's love. And then finally, I would invite you to take some notes and mull over what we've discussed tonight. maybe this is a new concept of evangelism for you, rooted and grounded in experiencing the love of God. Jot down some notes. Think about it every now and again. Kind of help to do that deconstruction, reconstruction process around evangelism, kind of dismantling those negative experiences that you've had, and consider what evangelism could look like if you leaned into this direction, or what it might look like in your community. And I very much look forward to continuing the conversation with you all in October. And I'm also available in the meantime if you want to send me an email or give me a phone call. My information, I can be reached on through the diocesan website. My information is there, and I'll put my email address in the chat in just a moment. Or maybe Susan, can you put my email address in the chat? Thank you. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for your time. And I would like to invite St. Paul's Kennewick and Resurrection Spokane Valley folks and St. Luke's Wenatchee folks to stay on the call for some further kind of going deeper and conversation around that at this point.
Can you
Go
tell
with
us,
God, my friends, and may you know and share the love of Christ.
can you
I
tell,
also, with Andrea's, I have a book on what is evangelism, and I do, like Andrea, highly recommend it. There is a lot of good resource in it and a lot of good stuff.
Thank you, Jeannie. And Stephen, it looked like you were wanting to say something.
where's where's the book available?
Yes, thank you. It is from Church Publishing. And I'd love to look into actually getting a bunch of copies for our diocese, but it's also available on Amazon and other booksellers. I'm sure a local bookshop would also offer it. Here in Spokane, I know Aunties is really good about ordering things that they don't have on their shelves. So that could be an option as well.
Thank you.
And it's around $8, I think. It's not a very expensive book. So you can
Yes.
definitely get them as a package to share with your folks reasonably.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.